I wanted to speak about some of the most common misunderstandings or misinterpretations I've seen when talking about astrology. I won't go in any specific order, just what comes up. Perhaps the first one is pretty broad, and it's the concept that astrology is fatalistic, or astrology is fate. That astrology tells you who you are, that you are your signs. But they're not your signs, and they're not your planets. And when a planet was in a sign at the time of your birth, it's an angle into you. If you think of the planet as what energy is at stake, and the sign as how that energy manifests, then it creates a kind of the banks of a channel, a suggestion, maybe a recommendation if there's nowhere else to look about how to do something. You can look to the stars and say, how do I do this? But I think this understanding of claiming ownership over the stars really points out our misunderstandings about how to use astrology. What does it mean to be born under a star? What does it mean to be born with planets that relate to each other in this or that aspect? But really, what does it mean to be born under? I think in modern times we want things outside of ourselves to tell us about our identity and our personality, and to justify the things we do as something that's predetermined. But the sign you were born under doesn't tell you who you are. Your actions tell you who you are. And the stars and the planets and moons and asteroids, all of this. You can see this as a universal mirror rather than a mother, not something who gave birth to you, but something that can reflect your actions. Another thing I notice is the concept of duality that's applied to astrology. I notice in a couple of ways. I'll talk about one and I'll see if I'll talk about another. One is in the interpretation of Mars and Venus, because we live in a time and place and body that distinguishes by sex and gender. There's been a tendency to apply concepts of this type of duality to Mars and Venus, as in that book, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. So that was a while ago, and I think that it was published. And there's kind of this underground undercurrent informing the ways that Mars and Venus are interpreted. That undercurrent is influenced by this binary gender dichotomy, where Mars is seen as, usually it's interpreted as anger, aggression, sex, this kind of movement, which these things are traditionally ascribed to a masculine character. On the other hand, Venus is usually referred to, usually translated as love, like the planet of love, and this is also ascribed to a more feminine, in the duality of masculine and feminine, a more feminine aspect. But I want to challenge this. The symbol of Mars, I mean, I don't think that that putting these concepts in a modern frame of duality actually serves our understanding of the concept on a broader level. To look at something in past history only through the lens of the present presents a lot of issues. You kind of have to forsake your current position in time to be able to learn old things. The symbol for Mars is a circle with an arrow coming out of it. I'm going to pull from Isabel Hickey again. Let's see if I can find Isabel speaks of a the shape of the symbolism of each of the planets, and they are, here we go, they're a lot of the symbols are based on 3 sub-symbols, the circle, the crescent, and the cross. So Mars has the circle. The circle, I'll read from her. The circle represents that which is boundless, eternal, infinite, without beginning and without end. It is often represented by the serpent swallowing its own tail. Ouroboros. The way I would translate this, what is something that is boundless and eternal and infinite? To me, this is the concept that we have of spirit, the concept of life, that thing that, not life that's bound by the human body that dies, but the type of life that appears to arrive out of nowhere. You know, what is that? So this is the symbol of the circle. So we have this infinite, boundless, endless energy, I guess, cultivating in this circular pattern and this arrow of escape inside of a human body. To me, this feels like the unsuppressible outburst of one's spirit. It's spirit moving it outwards. So I wouldn't explain that as something inherently masculine. Maybe more yang than yin on a spectrum, to be moving outward. But I would translate this astrologically to be that placements of Mars can inform one about the tendencies of expression. Sex, anger, aggression, all of these are types of expression that one could argue are pulled through, are indicated by Mars. Yet that's very narrow. I think you can also look at Mars to look at the way someone chooses to dress, the way that when someone's personality bubbles over and they can't contain it. This is Mars, the moving outwards. Venus also has a circle, and the circle is on top of a cross. The cross, wherever this is found, symbolizes earth living, the opposition of the human and the divine. It is a signature of this planet, for this is called the planet of the sorrowful star. This planet meaning Earth, the symbol of Earth with the cross inside of the circle. We are the rebel angels that set our will against the will of God in order to learn to be gods in our own right. Man, when he stands upright and extends his arms is in the form of a cross. When the outer self becomes the reflector of the true self, then we can truly say, I and my Father are one, and can understand the meaning of the phrase, no man cometh to the Father except through me. The me is the personality that has to become the servant of the high self. In the Aquarian age, this will come about through the redemption and mastery of the personality, rather than by crucifying it. There's a lot in there that I'm not going to talk about, but it's important to share information, I think. If the cross is matter, the cross in classical Chinese, the symbol for earth, not as in relation to heaven, but the concept of soil it looks like a cross on land. It's clay on a potter's wheel. It's heavy, it's material, it has gravity, it's dense, as opposed to the circle, which is endless. An endless thing cannot be bound physically if it wants to maintain form, but if it's formless, perhaps that's what circle is. So Venus is the meeting place of circle and cross. I would translate Venus as an indicator of intimacy, to bring two into one. What is that relationship? What is the relationship of circle and cross? Two things that don't fit yet resonate and are inextricably bound. What is that? So when receiving influence from Venus, or when acting in the angle of Venus in life, when putting your Venus shoulder forward, to me this is indicative of the way that we interact with intimacy, with meeting duality, and not duality necessarily as in oppositions, as opposites, but the conversation between. To me, that's not particularly feminine either. Inherently. I don't know if there is an inherent masculine or feminine, or if this is another way that English fails us by not lending itself well to subtlety and not lending itself well to the relative, and not lending itself well to the concept of time. So we talked about your planets do not determine your life, you do. There is a sense of free will in that you choose how you respond to your influence. You choose how you respond to your environment. There's also some not free will in this world. You didn't choose, arguably, your parents, your body, the time of history that you're born, the place. And yet there is still choice that you can learn to take. That what we think is the only response to an external stimulus is only bound by our conditioning and our ability to see broadly and to see possibility. With imagination beyond our bounds, we can learn to choose more freely. Some of the other myths that come up frequently when interpreting charts, personal charts, have to do with individual signs. There's myths about every sign. And by myth, I mean when something becomes simple, and not simple as in the way that most things are very simple, but we add complexity to them and distort them. But distortion happens in the other way too, where by simplifying a concept into a keyword, it kind of loses its whole flavor and becomes just this keyword. We have to remember that astrology is translated. I guess this comes to my next point. There is no absolute word or phrase that explains a planet, a sign, an aspect, an event, an astrological event. Words help us to understand something, but when we're learning about astrology, we're looking at the angle of constellations into our body. If you are standing on this plane of the earth as if you didn't move for centuries, or maybe even just a year, you would see how the constellations mark these places along the zodiacal elliptic that feel like there's like a gravitational like sounding. Please translate what I'm saying to how it makes sense to you. In the way that a needle on a compass turns north, there's this way that the angles into our body feel as though they are extending outwards or receiving something from this zodiacal elliptic that surrounds us. Planets move through these constellations, and it's important to note that the constellation isn't what's important. I think over and over again in astrology, form, matter, word, anything that tries to physicalize, I don't know if that's a word, but to grasp concept as something matter, something with matter, something physical, we begin to lose it. The stars in the sky are not important. They're like buoys in the ocean. The waters move. The shores extend or cave in. The buoys will move. The stars have moved, we know this. It's not the energy of the star that's important. We're not receiving, I wouldn't say we're not receiving energy from the star, but my understanding is that in astrology, we're using the star to mark a location, not to be a location, to mark the angle into us this way. And if you feel that and you look, you're like, what is that? Oh, it's where these stars are collected. That's where I feel that. When the planets move through these stars, and planets are things we can see and they physically appear from our vantage point to move through stars, constellations, I mean. Then we start to get a rhythm, form moving through formlessness or emptiness. You know, what is that? What does it look like when something of matter moves through this angle, moves through this formless angle where I get a feeling. So a lot of what we know has been trying to translate a feeling for millennia. So to argue about the correctness of words in astrology is both important to be specific and not important because it's words. Words are about as helpful as stars are to that angle. They direct us, they position us, they give us sort of location, a bounds, an idea, but you can't use a word. A word can never live up to what it is intending to represent. It will always only be a representation. When first approaching astrology, the goal often is to learn what this sign is, what that sign is. And you start off with the keywords that make sense to you. Oh, that I never got this sign But now that I hear this concept, now I feel like I get a better understanding of what this is. Over time, I think you develop new language and you hold on to some language, and I think it's always important to remember that the language acquired or sought after is merely a guide, and it needs to be let go of eventually if you are to connect with what it's pointing to. I might not go into the specific signs that have their myths, their simplified interpretations of interpretations of interpretations. I have this feeling if I get into one, I should get into all of them. Maybe I'll speak to some anyway, because I also want to. One I hear a lot when I sit down with someone, I will ask them a series of questions. First, have you ever had your chart read? I want to know. And the second question, when I have discovered the sun that they were born under, I will say, oh, this is your sun sign. What do you know about it? Or what do you agree with that you've heard? Or what do you resist? Or what feels challenging? Or what don't you get about it? So I get a lot of information from people about where they are in their relationship to this planet, for instance. And one that, again, all signs have weird reputations. But in speaking about duality earlier, one that I hear a lot is talking about Gemini being two-faced. You know, this is funny. When I speak of when studying astrology, it's studying really old stars. That's why the constellations have changed. We're studying Babylonian, I believe. And Babylonian interpretations of constellations. I don't know if there was a word in, Sumerian? What were you speaking in Babylonian times? That is two-faced, you know. So what is that angle? I mean, scrap the name and scrap the constellation. What's the angle that is attributed to air and attributed to mutability? That's attributed to being ruled by Mercury. What is that? Because the concept of duality, I think, comes from the interpretation of the stars and the twins mythology coming from the stars. And while there is validity in that, it's also important to remember that even old myths that are either born of stars or attributed to stars, so the myth happens on this plane or a plane, and a constellation that appears to reflect it now holds that story and that mythology. And now it's remembered because it has a physical place. I won't go into that. But recognizing the twins in this angle, it's important to understand the concept of twins. And it's important to remember the twins are merely a buoy in the ocean of this galaxy, I suppose. The universe. I don't know where the end is. I think Two-Face comes along because of twins, as if you literally have two faces. I think I would translate the concept of two not to literally mean two, but to mean more than one. If you are if there is Gemini, and Gemini is air, if Gemini has the quality of air, more so than others, and more so the quality of mutability, the ever-shifting winds. To me, there is not two directions of wind, but there is more two directions of wind than there is one direction of wind. So I might translate this concept of that in one sense could be the duality of two-ness into rather a numerological concept of two-ness, which is more than one. To name something as two is not necessarily two individual ones, but another way of saying more than one. So in a way, yes, Gemini can wear many faces. It's like Glob from Adventure Time. Is that the name of God with the many faces? This is more like Gemini. And it's not many faces as in different people. It's not many faces as in different personalities. This is also sometimes an interpretation. I think it's less like that. I think if you're able to shift with the winds and you're in a human body, then when you come across someone, you are able to see where the air penetrates, where you're able to connect. In this way, it's not having many faces. It's being able to transform yourself to fit into others, to connect from a different form. Perhaps another time I'll talk more about that. But I think the video just went off. So I'll stop for now.